What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Pitt mailbag here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. I am Noah Hiles. He is Chris Carter. We are your Pitt Panthers beat reporters here for the PG. And Chris, you're dancing. You're having a good time. It's Christmas season. I almost put on the Santa Claus hat. Might have to do that next mailbag.
I might have a Santa Claus hat. Actually, I think it's too small for my head, so I can't do that. I have a big head. All right. Chris trivia, real quick for y'all before we get into y'all questions. Trivia. My dad took me to my first Pirates game. I was 1 year old. My head could not fit the youth cap for cap night at the Pirates game at Three Rivers Stadium when I was a baby. At 1 year old, I have a big head.
So you were the kid who had to get the special helmet in Little League football? Like everyone else had, like
my parents would let me play Little League football. They only let me play flag because they didn't want me to mess up my body before I got to high school.
See, mine didn't care. So like, yeah, but we always had like the kids who had like the normal helmets or like the bell helmets that you wear when you're in little, and then our bike, that was what was named, like the 90s, 2000s ones. And then the kids whose heads were too big for the Little League helmets got to wear like Revo Speeds and stuff like what like kids in college were wearing. It was really funny. So we've got a nice little wide range of questions here.
We do.
From everyone. No Keaton Slovis talk, thankfully. And we'll just get started with it real quick. Tommy, coming in hot. What's the latest on Dior Johnson? Do you think he will be back at Pitt this year? And I apologize if that could be heard. My phone was ringing in the middle of that. It's the blood bank. They've always asked me to donate blood. I'll answer that question later. I'll answer this question now. Tommy wants to know, like I said, what's the latest on Dior Johnson? Chris, I don't think there's been an update, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the update is the fact that his felony charge was dropped. Originally, he was charged with multiple felonies and multiple misdemeanors. Several of them were dropped. He was what we knew from the preliminary hearing that I covered back in was it October? No, it was November that I did that. They dropped all but one felony and all but one misdemeanor. In another hearing that happened last week, they dropped the felony charge to another misdemeanor, which he pled guilty to 2 misdemeanors. So now that case is resolved. His situation is settled there as far as the law. Now we are at the place where it's up to the University of Pittsburgh to decide, what do you want to do now that Dior Johnson's case is settled? And typically, policy-wise, the Pitt stance as a university is if you don't have a felony, then you are reinstated. But this is very unique. I compare it to the last 2 Pitt basketball players that got into trouble with the law. John Hughley had a felony. Once it was resolved, reinstated. Ithiel Horton, mid-season, that felonies were dropped, mid-season and then reattached because of how crazy that case was. And as soon as it was resolved both times, he was back on the team. But neither of those situations were domestic violence situations, which is what Dior Johnson is involved in. And his pleading guilty involves a simple assault charge of a young woman on campus. So this is a very different situation than that. I'll also hearken it to Deion Hayes. And this is where I think it could lead to Dior Johnson being back. And I'm not advocating, I want to point out here, I'm not advocating for Dior Johnson to be back here. I'm just talking from what I understand of covering this team and this program and this university. But Deion Hayes was never officially suspended by the university when he came up with charges that were misdemeanors involving domestic violence as far as what was alleged. What happened was it was a team punishment. He sat out for a game. He practiced on the side, and he did team activities as far as there, but he wasn't allowed to play. As people saw, he played for Pitt and had 3 sacks for them against Miami in the regular season finale. Dior Johnson is now in that situation where it's up to the university. But I wouldn't be shocked if, because of how high profile this was, and because this was a felony charge that was dropped, and this was involving domestic violence, and Pitt has had rallies about rape and fighting rape culture on campus, I would not be shocked if this decision is out of the hands of Jeff Capel. It's out of the hands of Heather Like. I'd be more inclined to believe this is up to the chancellor. This is up to the university board. Is the people in the higher ups that make this decision, not the athletic department itself. But I could also see them saying, you know what? This kid's going to be allowed back on campus. I can see that happening just based off of how Pitt's policies have operated over time. I've covered them.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to know what what the criteria is for him being reinstated. Are you just going to compare this to past cases? Because if so, then that's your answer. Then he should be back if you're going based upon that stuff. And again, like you said, I'm not advocating for this at all.
Right. We're just being reporters as far as how we understand this.
How it is compared to past things. But this is just different. And I think you don't have to be a genius to understand that. You got to look at the pros and cons of giving this kid a second chance. And, I am a believer in second chances, and maybe he does deserve one. I'm not sure if that deserves to happen at Pitt, though, considering everything that took place. I mean, you're risking a lot as a university bringing this kid back on campus. It's going to create, like Chris said, a lot of turmoil amongst a lot of probably student body groups, and it might even bring in, exterior turmoil, people coming on your campus and protesting that don't even go to your school. And do you really want to deal with that? And then you look at all the negative attention that it's already brought the Pitt program. And that was the whole conversation about Pitt basketball before the season started. And now it looks to have a little bit of momentum going. It's 7-4. It has one more non-conference game and then 2 huge ACC games before 2022 wraps up. And it's got a chance to really set itself apart from the pack if it can go 3-0 to start ACC play heading into 2023. I don't know if this is a distraction that's worth it. Dior Johnson would be the most talented player on Pitt's roster. The most talented. Doesn't mean he's the best, and it doesn't mean he'd perform the best, considering everything that he's been through. He hasn't practiced with the team in 2 months now. And it just, he's also a freshman. He's never played a game at the collegiate level.
Right.
Is it really worth risking it all to bring him in here and kill the momentum that you do have? Sure, he could make your team better. But I mean, look at some other guys who, didn't start the season for other injuries. A guy like John Hughley, who, he was injured. He wasn't, suspended or anything. But look how bad it's been for him trying to get back on the same page with everyone else. That's a guy who's played with some of these players. This dude hasn't ever been here before. So it's tough. But again, because he doesn't have that felony charge, technically, I think they could do it and they could point to that. But I think it's a far more complex issue than that. And Pitt's clearly acknowledging that, because I don't think it took very long to see the other 2 guys get reinstated. Did it, Chris? It was like
no. Ithiel Horton was quick. Now the thing was, John Hughley's case didn't resolve until after the season, so there was no pressure on when for him to be reinstated because the games were gone. But Ithiel Horton, literally, the charges were when they were initially dropped before the holidays. He played 2 games. They were brought back up after New Year's, and then he was suspended again. And then when the case was resolved, he was back on the team, and he was able to finish the rest of the season there. They act pretty quickly, typically, on these situations. But they also treat these cases uniquely, and I think that they watch these things closely. I wouldn't be surprised if there's an internal process that Dior Johnson has to go through before the university approves it. And again, I think that itself, it's because this is a serious situation, and these are serious crimes that happened here, and a crime did happen here as he pled guilty to this. I think that the university is taking every step to say, like, hey, we are not bringing you back on our campus until we know that you will not do this to a student, because this wasn't a student that happened to, but it doesn't matter. We don't want you doing this to anybody on our campus. So if they brought him back on, even beyond the game, as far as what he could do to the team, if the university brought Dior Johnson back onto campus and he was allowed to attend classes, and after that something happened, the university would most likely be held liable. And this is me putting on my law hat here, but this would open them up to liability to say that, hey, you knew this kid was a threat. You had every reason to this. You saw the crime, and then you still brought him back on campus. And then this happened to my client. I'm going to sue for damages and such. And the university has to protect itself beyond image and all that. Just legal mind thinking. I'm thinking that's why this is very delicate. And there's a lot of doors I think that he's going to have, or a lot of hurdles he's probably going to have to clear with the university to justify him being reinstated.
So a name that we mentioned in that last answer, not in connection with Dior in any way, shape, or form, but just when it comes to Pitt basketball, is John Hughley. We'll go to this question now from Zach, who wants to know, what's wrong with John Hughley? Do you think Pitt can get through ACC play without him getting back to his old self? Well, John Hughley played came off the bench in Pitt's last
Yeah.
game and only played 10 minutes. I saw, Chris, you were there to cover it.
Yeah.
Fede Federico started in his place and had
a pretty good game.
A really good game. I think
Yeah.
17 and 14 was a stat line there. He played close to 30 minutes, I believe. And I mean, Fede has looked very impressive. John, not impressive at all. I think he's had 5 rebounds total in his last 4 games. I believe 18 points in that stretch as well. Just really still kind of finding his footing. Chris, I'll let you answer first on what you think is wrong with John and how far Pitt can go without him.
So we talked to Jeff about that after the game, and he was very adamant that he's like, look, John isn't at his best, and we know that, and we're working with him to get there. But he's like, John also hasn't had time to practice. And he said we haven't, as a group, had 5-on-5 practice since he's been back because we've been either had players being injured and needing to rest during weeks, or we've been going through a stretch. And Pitt did just play 3 games in 8 days. That they have been a stretch, and it was funny because I asked Fede Federico during the post-game press conference after their win. I was like, "When did you find out you were starter?" And he said, "Last week." And I was like, "What?" And he was like, "Yeah." Or wait a minute, was it last week? And Jeff's like, "It was yesterday." And he was like, "Oh yeah." And Jeff was like, "That's just how long this week has felt." I think that Pitt basketball has just been through a storm here. This is going to be a big week for John Hughley because now he'll have a week to recover, train, work on things, to get some team practice time, and then go into a non-conference game. They have North Florida coming up Saturday at the Pitt. This will be a really important tune-up game before they play Syracuse and start the bulk of their ACC schedule. But I do think a big part of this is I do think it's more health than necessarily chemistry, because and there is chemistry that's part of it, but John Hughley isn't able to do the things that John Hughley normally would do. Like there were so many times last year, regardless if it was Power 5, if there was a big set, if the other team had a big center, they would feed John Hughley down low, let him go to work, and then play off of him. And that was when Pitt was at its best. They can't do that right now. And I think that that's what they're trying to get him back to being. He's not there yet. Let's see if he's able to start to be that after they get more time to practice and rest a little bit, because they have this full week. And then after that, they'll have a good stretch before they have to play Syracuse. I think that this is going to be the ample time for him to work on it and improve to be the John Hughley that Pitt needs this year.
I don't know if it's health more than it is just he's unable to maintain the pace of play right now, especially against Power 5 opponents. I mean, against his 3 worst games of the year came against Northwestern, came against NC State, and came against Vanderbilt. And the Vanderbilt game especially, that was one of the worst showings I've seen from a starter at the Division I level. And I don't mean to knock on John too hard here, but I mean, he was a detriment. He was minus 13 on the night, and they benched him for a newcomer in a close game on the road. This is supposed to be his team, and they looked elsewhere. He kind of looked like the players in Space Jam after their powers get stolen from him. Like he was just falling all over the place. He couldn't hang on to the basketball, and he just wasn't ever in the right place at the right time on either end of the floor. And that's not injury related. That's just not being prepared to play against good teams. And he looked a little better, against the mid-majors they've played, against your Fairleigh Dickinsons, the Alabama State. That was probably his best game, and William and Mary and what have you. But it's just still, he's got to find a way to figure it out. And,
I agree.
You talk about he hasn't had time and everything, but in reality, he's played in like 7 games now. And he's been on the court with the team for over a month. So it is time that you figure it out, because when this team hosts North Carolina at the end of the month, they're going to need John Hughley. When they go to Durham next month, they're going to need John Hughley. When they play Virginia, who's number 2 in the country, I think, they're going to need John Hughley. They can't. Fede has been great. And if Fede keeps getting better, that's awesome for Pitt.
Yeah.
But anything you get from Fede coming into this year was a bonus. This was supposed to be the best player on the team, and he has been, out of the 7 who regularly play, been the least dependable. And there's no debating it.
No, I agree with that entirely.
It's his turn to step up. And whatever the case is, if he wasn't in shape, if he just wasn't there mentally, if it's a chemistry thing, if it's a health thing, whatever it is, it's got to be resolved soon. Because I think Pitt, with a healthy 2022 version of John Hughley, 2021, 2022 season John Hughley, this team can finish 500 in the ACC. And that's not maybe a thing about Pitt being great as it is just the rest of the ACC kind of stinking this year. But overall, Pitt has a really good chance to have a good season, and it's going to need their best player to be the best player. So we'll move over to football now. This is a common question I got, and it's something I'm working on now by the time you're watching this. It's from Billy. Who are some of Pitt's top transfer portal targets? Well, I'll say Phil Jakovic is one of them. I would say that. But just looking around, I mean, it's kind of crazy to follow all of this.
It is very difficult, Noah.
Yes, it's a lot of Twitter notifications.
It's a lot of notifications.
And just, getting a notification every time someone picks up an offer from Pitt or whatever. But these are some ones that I have my eye on as far as like things that I'm covering. Primarily, I'm looking at receivers. That's Pitt's biggest area of need, especially now that the quarterback's taken care of. They just don't have a lot on their depth chart. They were thin to begin with, and they had two guys transfer out of their quarterback or their receiver room already. So some guys that they're looking at, the big one is, of course, Cephas, Dante Cephas from Penn Hills, Kent State receiver. I think he had like 1,200 yards receiving 2 seasons ago. This year had 700 plus. I mean, this is one of the most sought after receivers in the country right now in the transfer portal. If you just look at the offers that he has, I have them actually right here: Georgia, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, Penn State, West Virginia, Kansas, Maryland, Miami, Virginia Tech, and Colorado. That's right. Deion Sanders even wants this guy. So he's got a lot looking at him. I've read elsewhere, I've seen other reports saying that he wants to enroll by the end of the year. Well, there's not a lot of time for that to happen, which would indicate he'd probably go somewhere close to home if that's the case for enrollment. So maybe Pitt's a player in there. Penn State, definitely a factor as always, West Virginia, but you never really know. Like I said, he has a lot of demand right now. Some other receivers that I've seen, Jack Beach from LSU has a couple of years of eligibility. I know Pitt has offered him. And of course, my guy, I hope I spoke this into existence on Twitter, Dakota's Crawford. And well, yes, like everyone loves him for his name and his NIL opportunities that come with it. He had the refrigerator company that endorsed him at Nebraska. My reasoning of liking Dakota's Crawford is he has 4 years of eligibility. He's a 4-star recruit, and essentially you bring him in as a true freshman because I think he got an injury redshirt this year. I'm not 100% certain on that, but I'm pretty sure he has 4 years of eligibility. Even if I'm wrong, he has 3. That's a very valuable addition to your football team.
That's a super valuable addition.
High school recruits in the country last year as a receiver, so that would be big. Like Cephas, he also has a lot of programs interested in him, and we don't know a ton about it, but that would be a big get. Other names, Donovan McMillan, another Whippeal kid Pitt's interested in. Peters Township, defensive back from Florida, where he played the last 2 years. I believe he has 2 years of eligibility because he's pretty much played in every game he's dressed for the Gators as a special teams guy. And another quarterback, Christian. How do you say this guy's last name, Chris? Do you know Velo? Something like that?
I think it is Velo, yes.
Velo, quarterback for Penn State. Pitt offered him out of high school. He's in the portal again, and I could see this being a good match for Pitt where they brought in a veteran, a 1-year guy, and they brought in a guy who has multiple years of eligibility left. I think he has 2 or 3. So that would be a good addition as well. Those are the ones I have. Did I miss anyone, Chris? Anyone else?
No, you did a lot of them. The other thing about this is that people need to understand the transfer portal is so fluid. There's going to be more people that pop in the transfer portal after bowl season. And then you'll start to get a real sense of things. I think what'll be really interesting to lean in on is, National Signing Day when that approaches. How many does Pitt actually sign of their class? How many do they keep after that class of their next class? Because they already have guys signed to future years, or not signed, verbally committed to future years. So I think that there's a lot of things in flux right now. So it's just getting in the ears of guys, showing stuff, showing what you got. But I think one thing that's going for them, especially for guys they're trying to recruit on defense, is Kalijah Cansey racking up awards right now. Izzy Abanikanda, also a third-team All-American, according to the Associated Press. So
Eric Hallett had some All-American honors from different,
exactly,
of the
and
30 billion of them that exist.
Right, because there's so many. But the point being, the more awards you're racking up, the more you can go to these kids and say, and we're seeing the tweets. We're seeing people, like, not just players, but their family being like, "Thanks so much for visiting us." Da da da. Pat Narduzzi and his crew, they are on the move. They're talking every week. That's why we're not talking to them, because they are recruiting right now. So absolutely, I think that there's a lot going on. But again, just wait till things play out. Let's be patient with the transfer portal, because again, we still don't even know all the people that are definitely going to be in it for this season.
Yeah, and a month from now, the college football season will be over. National Signing Day will be over. We'll have a much better idea of what everything's going to look like. It's just like with Chris said, with signing day 9 days away now, and 8 depending on when you're watching this, and then bowl season, who knows? So we got a couple more. You mentioned Kalijah Cansey, Chris. Consensus All-Americans. So with that being said, where does Kalijah Cansey rank on Pitt's best all-time defenders? All right. Jeez. I'm going to step in and say this right now.
All right.
Kalijah Cansey is not on the same tier as Aaron Donald. He's not on the same tier as Hugh Green.
No.
When I think of Kalijah Cansey's legacy right now, I think the best thing you could say about him as far as statement-wise would be he is the best defensive player in the Pat Narduzzi era. I think that that's a fair statement to make.
Okay.
The most successful defensive player in the Pat Narduzzi era.
I'll say that, because I would say Rashad Weaver was a force.
And he has actually, he had a more statistical career, but Weaver played defensive end, not defensive tackle, correct?
It's a different spot.
Right.
No, I agree with that. I'll agree with you. I think that Kalijah Cansey is the best defender that Pat Narduzzi has had in his era. I also want to point out it's the third straight year that Pat Narduzzi has had a consensus All-American, confirmed that Monday with the Associated Press. That's very good.
Yes.
And that's also 4 and 3 years. You had Patrick Jones and Rashad Weaver in 2020, Jordan Addison in 2021, and now Kalijah Cansey in 2022. And Kalijah Cansey is still alive for the unanimous All-American.
I thought you were going to say just alive. I'm like, I hope so. He just had a shoulder injury.
He's
not dead. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was like, what? He's still, but his hopes are still alive. I should have said it that way. I apologize. His hopes are still alive for unanimous All-American, and that is extremely rare air. Pitt's only had 14 times where they've gotten a unanimous All-American. 12 different players. Hugh Green and Bill Fralick got it twice in their careers at Pitt, but the last person to be unanimous was Aaron Donald. The last person before him, Larry Fitzgerald. That is the class that Kalijah Cansey could be in. It's up to the American Football Coaches of America and Sporting News. Now, a little history here. American Football Coaches of America usually comes through for Pitt players. Sporting News, that Rashad Weaver had a chance to be in a unanimous All-American. They flipped it. They flipped him out and didn't make him first team. They made him second team, and that was what prevented him from being that in 2020. So could be the same thing again. But one thing that's for sure, in almost every list, it's been Jalen Carter, Kalijah Cansey. That's amazing company to keep if you're Kalijah Cansey right now.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is, as far as Cansey's legacy goes, I think that he's the Pitt player on the defensive side of the ball who will get remembered with the team success as well. I mean, if you look at it, he was an anchor to an ACC championship defense. He was here during Pitt's run of all the times they were up in the top 5 in sacks in the country. Like, he was the face of that, really. And, he was an All-American. So while Aaron Donald and Darrelle Revis and all of those guys, had their success, the teams weren't that great back in those days. Where Kalijah did it, and his efforts maybe, statistically aren't going to measure up to some other guys in Pitt history, but his efforts led to team success. Similar to guys in the 80s. I mean, it hasn't been that successful, but similar to that. And it's the first time we've seen that in a long time. So that's also worth noting, that he's a conference player of the year on a team that was winning consistently with him being here. So final question comes from Kimberly, and we've got a volleyball question, Chris. Where would a national title from the Pitt volleyball team rank in Pitt sports history? Well, it'd be up there, considering that it'd be the first time the schools won a national championship since 1976. So
yeah,
I mean, I don't know a ton about women's sports history at Pitt. I would have to say it's probably the most monumental achievement for any Pitt women's sports team, right? I don't know.
I agree with that.
I mean,
I agree with that.
Like, you got to assume that there's not a ton of national team titles for Pitt women's athletics. And I think it represents something significant in the sense where Heather Lyke was hired to bring athletic excellence across the board. And you're seeing that right now with Pitt, where football is better since Heather Lyke came here. Basketball, they're working on it. But if you look at the other ones,
technically it is better because it's not Kevin Stallings.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, if you look at other sports, look at where men's soccer is right now. Look at where women's soccer is right now. You look at where volleyball is. Baseball and softball have had recent runs in past years as well. So I think in general, sports as a whole are much better at Pitt. And you're seeing some programs go from good to great, from irrelevant to relevant, and you're seeing some take that further step and become some of the marquee programs in the country, like Pitt Volleyball, who is now in its second straight Final Four and is 2 wins away from winning a national championship. So I think finalizing that and getting that win, you talked about, a stamp on someone's resume, that's the highlight. That's the best thing Heather Lyke has done in her career as an AD, would be bringing Pitt a national champion. That's something not any athletic director Pitt has been able to do since the 70s. Chris, do you have anything to add on that?
I mean, that was a great roundup of that, but I think it would be such a win for Pitt to get one of these programs to hit this way. Both soccer programs did great this year, and it was unfortunate that the men's team couldn't pull it out in the College Cup, but still, to be there back-to-back season is ridiculous. Like, to be in that conversation, it shows you're not a fluke. You're a real program that has real things going on for you. And I think that's what volleyball's proved as well. They just knocked off the national champions in their house.
Yes.
Like that wasn't a neutral arena. That was in Wisconsin. And I think that is ridiculous for them to go do that. And they proved, they talked about, like, there was a chip on their shoulder about, not being the 1 seed despite being ranked number 4 by 2 of the major 3 polls. I think that this is a really good sign, but Dan Fisher has built something special there. And I think, and I tied this into my Heather Lyke article when we spoke to her about a week ago, was that Pitt is building a brand and an identity of players buying into the team. Pat Narduzzi always says, "We, not me." And I know a lot of people probably brush stuff like, well, he's Pat Narduzzi. He says that stuff all the time. But this stuff does seem to resonate. For example, with Pitt Volleyball, they're a superstar team. 2 years ago, Valeria Vasquez Gomez was on the team, was a star, was killing it, was getting a lot of points. Then she got hurt. Last year, she lost her starting spot to another person who came in and just beat her out for the spot. And Dan Fisher brought up, she could have transferred. She could have easily gone somewhere else, been the ace on the team, probably been an ace on a competitive team, and been happy about it and not have to worry about it. She didn't take it as a slight. She said, I got to work on my game. She stuck around. Now she's a star on this Pitt team that's going to the Final Four. And I think that stuff like that, when Pitt can point to, like, look at Kenny Pickett. Look how he's doing. He's with the Pittsburgh Steelers making millions of dollars. He's a Heisman Trophy candidate who won the ACC championship with us. Look at the people that are sticking around and what is paying off to be Pitt graduates or Pitt people and have that define their careers. I think all of that is working in their favor. And this volleyball championship, if they were to win it, it wouldn't change your football recruiting or your basketball recruiting, but it would be a great moment for a fan base, an alumni group. And I think it'd be something amazing to celebrate, because that is a special team. These women who are playing, Noah, they're playing amazing team volleyball. And I'm not going to speak as if I'm the volleyball aficionado, but when I look at the other teams in the tournament, there were people that specialized in certain things, and that's just what they would do. And if they were putting in a rough spot, like if your top kill person had to go get a dig to save the team, that would be in a rough spot. Courtney Buzzario is right there doing that. She's their leading scorer. She's going and getting the dig. She's making the tough plays. The people who make the tough plays, Rachel Fairbanks, can also score. It's such a great team environment. They've all bought in. I think they're a shining example of what team sports can be at Pitt Athletics and across the world. So that's why I think everybody, if you're a Pitt fan or a Pittsburgh fan or you're a fan of sports in general, you'll be rooting for that team in the Final Four.
All right. Well, that'll wrap us up here today. We appreciate your questions as always. Carter, any final thoughts?
Yep. Can't wait for when we're just focusing on one sport. As much as I love covering football and volleyball and everything else that we've had to do with the fall sports, I am so excited for us to just kind of lock in on Pitt basketball.
Buddy, you're telling me. I'll see you in Nebraska. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Follow us on our social media accounts and keep tuning in. We'll keep bringing the content here on the Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel. Take care.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.